For 3 years, the Western Front had been an industrial meat grinder. Millions of men were fed into the artillery fire, and in exchange, their armies captured mere yards of shattered earth. Life in these frozen dugouts was an exercise in pure endurance. Soldiers waited out the winter in sub-zero temperatures, pinned down by sniper fire and the constant threat of bombardment. Look at the map of Western Europe at this time. A continuous 300-kilometer scar of trenches had solidified from the North Sea all the way down to the Swiss border. Neither side could flank the other. When military commanders tried to force a breakthrough at places like Verdun and the Somme, the result was 1 million casualties in a single battle. Yet the lines on the map remained exactly where they started. By 1917, it was obvious. The war had become a self-sustaining engine of mutual destruction. There was no tactical brilliance left to deploy, and no clear way to end the fighting. Then, the geopolitical math shifted entirely. In the East, the Russian Empire collapsed under the weight of its own revolution. Vladimir Lenin took power, and he immediately signed an armistice with Germany. Suddenly, Germany was no longer fighting a two-front war. They could take hundreds of thousands of battle-hardened troops from the Russian border and send them straight to the Western Front. At the same time, the German Navy escalated a desperate tactic called unrestricted submarine warfare. Their U-boats began sinking any ship heading to Britain, regardless of whether it was a military vessel or a civilian merchant ship, hoping to starve the British into submission. This strategy had disastrous diplomatic consequences. German torpedoes sank massive ocean liners like the Lusitania, drowning over 1,000 passengers, including 128 American citizens. For years, the United States had refused to get involved in a European conflict. But the mounting civilian death toll, combined with British intelligence intercepting a German telegram trying to recruit Mexico into the war, pushed American public opinion to the breaking point. In April 1917, President Woodrow Wilson went before Congress and formally asked for a declaration of war against the German Empire. Germany's calculated effort to choke out Britain had backfired. They had officially brought an untouched, fully functioning industrial superpower into the conflict. The German High Command recognized the reality of their situation immediately. Thanks to the troops arriving from Russia, they finally had a distinct numerical advantage over the French and British, but that advantage was temporary. This diagram illustrates the problem. Germany had to launch a decisive attack and force a French surrender right now, before the United States could mobilize its population, train an army, and ship millions of fresh soldiers across the Atlantic Ocean. Urgent. This urgency triggered the Spring Offensive of March 1918. Germany threw everything they had into one final massive assault, aimed squarely at capturing Paris. The brutal, grinding stalemate that had defined the last 3 years was gone. The entire conflict was now a desperate sprint against the clock. Initially, the German gamble worked. Specially trained shock troops tore through the Allied defenses, climbing out of the craters and pushing forward with terrifying speed. They advanced miles into French territory in a matter of days, seizing ground that the Allies had bled for years to hold. The exhausted British and French armies were pushed to the absolute edge of collapse. But the German supply lines couldn't keep up with their own rapid advance. And just as their momentum began to stall, the first waves of fresh American troops marched onto the battlefield. Knowing the Americans were coming had forced the German army to overextend itself. When 2 million actual U.S. soldiers finally materialized in the trenches to reinforce the Allies, the German military capacity simply broke. The combined Allied forces immediately launched a massive counterattack known as the 100 Days Offensive. They hit the depleted German lines and began driving them relentlessly backward toward their own border. With their military retreating and the civilian population starving under the British blockade, the German government collapsed. On November 11, 1918, they officially signed an armistice, halting the bloodshed. The following year, the victorious nations convened to draft the Treaty of Versailles. They explicitly assigned the entire blame for the war to Germany, demanding astronomical financial reparations that would cripple their economy. The sheer industrial scale of a new global alliance made continued German resistance mathematically impossible,
ending a war defined by years of unbreakable inches.
For the German public back home, this surrender was psychologically jarring. Because the war had been fought entirely in France and Belgium, German citizens had never seen their own territory invaded. To them, their soldiers were deep in enemy land one day and conceding defeat the next. This severe disconnect bred a toxic conspiracy theory known as the stab in the back myth. People began to falsely claim that the military was actually winning, but had been betrayed and sold out by cowardly politicians at home. Among the veterans who deeply internalized this anger was an injured soldier recovering in a military hospital when the armistice was announced. 2 decades later, he would weaponize that exact sense of betrayal to seize absolute control over the country. America's entry definitively won the First World War, but the abrupt, shocking nature of that victory planted the immediate seeds for the Second.